Have you ever wondered about the exact moment when a losing side knows the game is up? For many of Hitler's top generals, this wasn't a sudden realization in the ruins of Berlin in 1945. It was a creeping, chilling certainty that dawned on them months, even years, before the final surrender. These were the men who planned the Blitzkrieg, who oversaw the initial stunning victories. So, when did the tide turn in their own minds? Let's dive into the private thoughts and secret confessions of the architects of the Third Reich's war machine as they began to understand the catastrophic end was inevitable. The story often begins in the brutal winter of 1941, on the outskirts of Moscow. The German army, once thought invincible, was literally frozen in its tracks. General Heinz Guderian, the pioneer of tank warfare, saw it firsthand. His panzers, designed for swift summer campaigns, were useless in the deep snow and sub-zero temperatures. He pleaded with the high command, and with Hitler himself, for a strategic withdrawal to a defensible winter line. His pleas were not just ignored, they were seen as defeatism. Guderian was dismissed from his command in December 1941. For him, this was the moment of truth. He understood that a war against the vastness of Russia, its endless manpower, and its merciless winter could not be won with fanaticism alone. The failure to take Moscow wasn't just a setback. It was the fatal crack in the foundation of the entire Eastern Front strategy. He knew then that the war of annihilation they had started would eventually annihilate them. While the Eastern Front bled Germany dry, another critical turning point was brewing in the West. It wasn't a battle, but a date. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. When news reached Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters that Japan had attacked the United States, there was initial celebration among some of the Nazi leadership. But for the more astute military minds, it was a death sentence. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, head of the German Navy, was horrified. He knew his Kriegsmarine was no match for the combined might of the Royal Navy and the U.S. Navy. He later wrote in his memoirs that the entry of the United States into the war made a German victory impossible. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, a Luftwaffe commander, shared this sentiment. He understood industrial capacity. He knew that America's manufacturing power, its arsenal of democracy, would eventually overwhelm Germany's war economy. They could build planes, ships, and tanks faster than Germany could destroy them. From that day forward, for these men, the war became a grim mathematical equation they knew they couldn't solve. By 1943, this private pessimism was becoming widespread. The Battle of Stalingrad was the wound that would never heal. The surrender of General Paulus and the entire Sixth Army was a psychological catastrophe for the German military establishment. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, arguably Germany's most brilliant strategist, launched a masterful counteroffensive after Stalingrad. But even he confided to his inner circle that it was only delaying the inevitable. He saw that they were now fighting a war of attrition, a numbers game they were destined to lose. They were constantly plugging holes in a collapsing front line, trading space for time, but time was not on their side. Manstein recognized that Hitler's refusal to allow strategic retreats or grant commanders operational freedom was hamstringing the army. Every decision was filtered through the Führer's irrational, ideological lens, making a purely military victory impossible. In the deserts of North Africa, another legend was coming to terms with reality. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, had enjoyed spectacular success. But by late 1942, his luck had run out. At the Battle of El Alamein, he was starved of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. He saw the endless stream of brand-new American Sherman tanks arriving for the British, while his own panzers were running on fumes. After the defeat, and during the subsequent Allied landings in Operation Torch, Rommel flew to see Hitler. He laid out the hopeless situation in Africa, arguing for a full-scale evacuation to save his veteran troops. Hitler refused, shouting him down. It was in that moment that Rommel's faith in the supreme leadership was irrevocably broken. He realized Hitler was living in a fantasy world, completely detached from the grim realities on the ground. For Rommel, the war wasn't just lost militarily. It was being lost by a leader who had lost his mind. This growing disillusionment culminated in the most dramatic expression of dissent, the 20th July plot of 1944. This was not a sudden act of desperation. It was the result of years of mounting certainty among a core group of officers that Hitler was leading Germany to total destruction. Men like Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, General Ludwig Beck, and General Friedrich Olbricht had seen enough. They were privy to the real numbers, the casualty reports, the production figures. They knew that with the Allies storming the beaches of Normandy in the west and the Soviet steamroller advancing in the east, the war was over. Their assassination attempt was a last, desperate gamble to overthrow the regime, end the war, and salvage what was left of Germany. They failed and paid with their lives, but their actions are the ultimate proof that the most senior figures in the Wehrmacht had understood the catastrophic truth long before the final shots were fired. Even among those who remained outwardly loyal, the private diaries and post-war testimonies tell a similar story. General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff of the Armed Forces High Command, who would be tried and executed at Nuremberg, admitted that after the failure of the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, in the winter of 1944, he knew all hope was gone. This last-ditch gamble had spent Germany's final reserves of men and material. When it failed, there was nothing left. The war machine was running on empty. From that point on, Jodl and his colleague Wilhelm Keitel were merely presiding over the orderly and horrifying disintegration of the German military. They were no longer waging a war to win, but simply managing a collapse. So, from the frozen plains of Russia to the scorching sands of Africa, the realization dawned at different times for different commanders. For Guderian, it was the failure at Moscow. For Raeder, the entry of America. For Manstein, the disaster at Stalingrad. And for Rommel, it was a direct confrontation with a delusional Führer. These men, the elite of the German military, saw the writing on the wall. They understood logistics, industrial power, and strategy in a way that Hitler, the ideologue, never could. Their story is a powerful reminder that wars are not just fought on the battlefield, but also in the minds of those who lead. And for Hitler's generals, the mental war was lost long before the final, devastating defeat. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this glimpse into the minds of these historical figures interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments when you think the turning point of the war really was. We'll see you in the next one.